Great to be here. And first of all, a brief introduction. So we are Plan Early. Phrase is don't plan late, but plan early. It's a very subtle play. And our whole focus is on this concept of what we call smart, lean BIM. And the definition is the right BIM at the right time, by the right people, but for the right reasons. And if you guys are familiar at employing and deploying and using BIM on projects or starting to, you'll know that you can use it for so many different things. You could use it for understanding the design from a marketing perspective and winning a project. You could also right the way through analyzing people movement, structural analysis, solar, all of the different ways of analyzing a building can be more automated. We can understand clashes and quantities and simulations, AR, VR, MR, all of these different ways of viewing, and then also in facilities and many more. But whilst that is a good thing, it also causes us a big challenge when we're creating models. So from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, these are all BIM. They are all models, 3D models, but they've got different amounts of elements, a different amount of maybe data, of accuracy, of information, and who is going to do what BIM at what point in time can sometimes be a big challenge. And when we're trying to use BIM to optimize, but if we create too much BIM too soon or too little BIM too late, then it can cause us problems. And if nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing, we can end up a lot of the time in duplicate effort. So in this example, we have the same light fixture being modeled by 4 different parties on a project. And that is wasteful, it is unnecessary, but it occurs a lot in our construction, in our design and construction industry. And those are common challenges. We could end up with out of sequence work. We end up with too many clashes, lots of rework, lots of conflicts, data that's very difficult to understand. And therefore, this international standard comes along. It's our opportunity to really understand how we can standardize and provide more consistency and let teams build a plan with purpose so that they can execute and not have all of those wasteful problems that we introduced there. So the ISO 19650, probably you guys have had a small introduction to it, but the principle is that there are lots of workflows and lots of steps that are involved. This is the clause 5 unpacked in these 8 different steps, and each step has a set of requirements. And in order to be compliant, we need to follow this workflow. Well, as a result from that workflow, we end up with a set of documents as well. And those documents, they range from organizational and strategic based information requirements through project information requirements, exchange information requirements, asset information requirements, BIM execution plans, pre and post appointment, pre and post contract planning so that you can execute along the same lines with methods and procedures, responsibility matrices, whether it's a high level or a detailed responsibility matrix, task information delivery plans, master information delivery plans, RACI charts, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, and so many others. But this is a list of quite a lot of documents that would be needed. So if you are overwhelmed, if you are one of those people sitting there going, oh my word, how do I even manage this? You're not the only one. There are many, many people in the same situation. And unfortunately, that's not the end of the problems. The industry from a BIM perspective has been supported by these leading software providers to create great authoring tools, great analysis tools, and great use of a model. So some of these tools you're probably using already. But one of the biggest challenges is that we've got to implement that whole workflow that we just described with all those documents, but we are still using planning and management tools that are not dedicated. They're not purpose-built for design and construction or BIM. And they end up being disconnected, not only from themselves, but also from the rest of the workflow. So how can we help? This is the situation in our industry, but how can we help? Well, there are a couple of different ways. The first is that we can consolidate all of those different tools and into one cloud-based, super efficient, and much easier to implement workflow. And the workflow is in 2 main parts that I'll share with you today. The first is the planning piece, and there are 3 modules to support that. And the second is in the controlling and making sure that what you planned and contracted for is actually controlled and verified. So the first part is solving that technical challenge and making it more simple to implement in a dedicated tool set. And the second one is the content. So how do you get a good plan Well, you need sometimes templates in order to achieve that. So we're really lucky to have now, I think it's over 200 people in a review team from more than 30 countries that are the ones writing and revising and updating these templates based on every change that occurs in the international standards, every new idea that comes out from these experts around the world. And if you know somebody that would like to join the review team, there's a link at the bottom there that we welcome people in and their ideas to improve these templates. What happens is when you create a Planoly account, you can have access to all of those templates. So in this example, we are clicking on some of the templates to create documents. And this is what I'll walk you through in the software today. In the plan module, we have everything from the BIM execution planning, exchange of information requirements, RACI diagrams, etc. In the scoping module, we'll see how we complement all of that method-based information requirements and procedures with the detailed requirements for assets and for systems and for information that is required from a contract perspective. And then we'll also show how you can filter that based on which appointment, which contract documents you want to create. And we can create contract documents and get them approved with an e-signature inside of the platform. And there's a whole bunch more that we'll cover, but just sort of putting it into perspective before we dig into the software. I'm sure that there are many questions, but the main one maybe is, what is Planoly? What does that look like, and how can I get access to it? So the first part to say is that it's all web-based. I am in a Chrome browser. If you go to planoly.com, you can sign up if you don't have an account already, but you will be invited to a project on your account. If I log in, I'll be presented with my workspaces and any of the projects that I'm working on. On the top level, we have our account access, and different accounts can have different setups so that you can group these per project or per company or per workspace, lots of different ways to organize it. I'm going to simply create a new project, and the starting point for our first project, for our first part of the demo, I'll walk through these first three modules. So if I say this is our project, and if I hit create, the first part that we will see is a set of templates. Let me jump back in our slides. The first module in the series is the plan module. The plan module allows you to, from your templates or from the industry standard templates, drag and drop or click on those tiles to create your starting point for either an EIR or a BIM execution plan or a bunch of the other really important documents that we highlighted from the ISO standards. And we are simply going to use the plan module to start to create and collaborate, not just on static information, but also maybe embed videos, allow you to go through a process of sharing and commenting and publishing on content in smaller pieces, smaller chunks of information, and also complement that with the rich library of standards that are available. So let me jump back. So we're in the software again. I'm going to flick backwards and forwards. One of the first starting points is to know which templates you would like to use. Here we have the ISO 19650 templates, which I think would be useful for you guys, but there are others and also other languages available inside of the app. For the workflow, let's create an EIR with a BEP. That BEP could be a pre or post contract, a pre or post appointment document. Then maybe we would like to have some record of the minutes from our meetings. And simply I'm going to hit create, and that will then, from those documents, create us the three tabs. So we have a tab for the EIR, Exchange Information Requirements, a tab for the BIM execution plan, and a tab for the meeting minutes. The first thing to note in this structure is if we fold up everything, we collapse all of the levels, you can see the top level here is a category. If I open the category, you can see these are what we call plan sections, and plan sections are reusable pieces of content that if I open up, you can see either it's text, it could be tables, it could be images, it could be videos, it could also be documents as well, so we can embed and drag and drop documents into the content. Fully editable, everything as you would expect inside of a browser. For the very detailed and maybe advanced teams, there is also a code view that you can dig into the HTML and embed pretty much anything that you can imagine that can be embedded inside of a web browser. So the first part was pretty simple. We started off with some documents and we created our content. The next part would be to start to adapt that content, fill in the project details, for example, calling this the facility name, new project, etc. If I can spell. And as you start completing this content, you would then start to say that it is ready for somebody to comment on. And as the comments come in from your team members, if I could mention certain team members, it's only me at the moment, but if I start to create content and comments, you can see when this was created, when it was shared, what the comments and conversation is. And then if I was to then say, oh, I didn't mean to do that, I meant to go to published, but you can then start to see when it changes status to become published as well. So the whole history of every section is retained inside of each section. The history of the activities on the project feed are also contained inside of the notification side and on the panel on the right hand side. So we can track all of the time what's going on. One of the things that you might want to do as you are maybe completing your BIM execution plan is dig into other content that you might have had in other projects. And if we are on the left-hand side, we can also access the templates. And if we wanted to access and then maybe find something about coordination, we can see something about how we manage clash detection. And maybe this is a template or a section that we would like to drag and drop into our project. So this complementing with our existing standards, complementing with historical project data, and continually building up this set of documentation to make it a lot easier for teams to collaborate and agree on the plan. Let me pause there and we'll have a brief recap on each of these modules, but that is the plan module, using templates that range from your exchange of information requirements right the way through to capturing meeting minutes, and being able to transition these plan sections from an in progress through shared and then also published status. As we work on this, we might want to filter just for what is shared so that we can start to understand what we need to comment on. We might want to filter for just what's published so that we can see what's available and authorized for use by everyone on the project. That is the plan module. There is a lot more to it, but I'm sure that there'll be some questions as well in the Q&A time. So let's move on to the scope. The scope is where we would start to define the level of information need based on the geometry, the documentation and information requirements. And this is both a data and a visual way of defining those requirements so that teams can really understand what they are signing up to. And in the grid, we will see columns that represent the use or the purpose of that model or of the information that is required. We will see the dates at which they are required, the teams that are responsible for the content required, maybe if it's 2D representation or if it's a 3D representation. We will see checklists, we'll see notes, attachments, and information requirements, and really, really detailed requirements that are assigned to certain teams that you can see maybe the handover from one team. Maybe early on, the architect is responsible for the stairs. Later on, it might be the structural engineer. And being able to define that early from templates, make it easy for the owner to understand what the assets are maybe at handover and what information requirements are needed to slim down those responsibilities for the rest of the teams as they go through the design and construction process. And doing it visually is really pretty cool and makes it a lot easier for teams to agree before they end up spending a lot of time wasted on duplicate effort like we saw in the light fixture example. So let's take a look and move on to the scope. We're defining here in the scope the task requirements. Again, we could use different templates to be able to create these straight out of the box, or we could create from an empty scope and simply use the library of content on the left-hand side to drag and drop into our project. I'm going to cheat and let me hit refresh again and bring up that library of different templates, and we can use those to start off. And in this example, let's say that we are building a model for 3D coordination. We could have multiple purposes, but in this example, I'm going to use that 3D coordination as an example. And what that's going to create us is the column for 3D coordination, the list of all of the possible items that we might need, and then also define which items are required, who is responsible, maybe some notes or attachments or links or checklist items that are required, And all of that is based on our standard, or based on our historical data, or based on our project standard. So here it's created us. Let me fold all of these up so that we've got just at the folder level, and I can open up the folders to show what we are requiring, maybe from an architectural perspective, what we are requiring from a structural perspective. And you can see that this set of requirements is defined at the 3D coordination milestone. If we open up one of these, so for example, here, the concrete stairs, you can see that there is a description, there are checklist items, there are maybe information requirements, and also attachments and links out to other places. We can see that it's assigned to the structural team, and we can even start to understand the details as far as what is it going to be tracked by, who is it assigned to, what the status is. So we jumped quite quickly into this, but let me show you also how we would build this up from the library on the left-hand side if we were to build that from scratch. Maybe we would just create a new folder. So if I call this new folder, and inside of that folder, we might want to drag and drop certain items from our library. And the library actually is an element library. It's a maybe even conceptual level items, so depending on what type of requirements you're talking about, and even document requirements as well. So things like bills of quantities, calculations, clash detection reporting, drawings, etc. And this library is continually evolving. It's translated into a lot of different languages, but it's also complemented with a bunch of templates that maybe if you are following, for example, the uniformat folder structure, we can start to see how this would be built out, and we can start to drag and drop and use this content to create maybe a coded based hierarchy of requirements as well. Let me go back to the element library and close that up. And then let's take a look at just dragging one item. So this is a group of items, the column foundations, and I'm going to drop it. As you see, if I move this, and you can see the tree structure where I'm going to drop this inside of that new folder. And now it's inside of here. We can move the folders around. We can drag these and drop them inside of if we wanted to. But what we're starting to do is build the grid. We're building the list of requirements down the left-hand side, and we would be building what is required inside of this milestone for this set of items. So for column foundations, for 3D coordination, what is it that we require? Maybe we want to just click once and say we require something in 2D. Maybe we would like to represent that in 3D. Maybe we would like to have more detailed representation. Maybe it's that we only require a certain item. So if we were to just say we only require the cages, the reinforcement, or we also require the concrete and maybe the zones of influence underneath. So you can see we're building up that set of requirements. We can drag these around so that we can start to have more order to it, adding things like checklist items, do this and this, and this. We start to have checklist items. We can add information requirements from a library of whether it's IFC-based parameters or whether it's your own defined requirements. This set of requirements is then available through the rest of the workflow and can be exported or validated inside of the workflow as well. So lots to cover. Just to sort of show you that list of requirements, and maybe if we added some more as well. So let's take a look at maybe, let's add another milestone. So at the top, maybe we would like to add another milestone for the estimate, and maybe another milestone for the handover and building commissioning. And maybe these are based on groups. So you can see them in the background that are showing up. Maybe we would like to base these on the phase of a project. And maybe we are following SD, DD, CD, or maybe these are stage based. So this might be stage 4. This might be stage 6. And we can drag and drop these around. You can see it all updating in the background. So if we go out of here, you can see 2 of these milestones, 2 deliverables that are based on stage 4, and then one of them, the handover in stage 6. Really flexible to define, but the key really is that we are showing much more than historically where teams would maybe use an LOD number rather than a very descriptive and defined set of requirements that are following something called the level of information need, a concept which is the framework by which the ISO 19650 standards are helping to define requirements that are purpose-driven and built in a way that can be then automatically checked later. Okay, so we've covered the plan. The plan was creating the documents and following those standards and using the templates out of the box. The scope that we've just defined is defining who needs to do what and when. Now, the next module is actually the contract module, being able to take all of the different parts of that workflow that we've just created and create a contract to get e-signature from those teams on. So let's go to the contract module as the third point. Very easily and quickly, we can say what we would like to include in that contract. I'm just going to check all of these and I'm going to call this contract and I'll hit print. It creates us a contract at the bottom. It could be filtered based on the teams involved. It could be filtered based on the milestones, could be filtered based on the folder structure, based on what information we need. And all of those filters can create a specific contract for a specific party. We've just selected everything and just defaulted to the default cover page and default settings and default header and footer, etc. But what that's doing in the background here is it's gathering all of those inputs and putting them into one PDF. So once this creates that contract, once that's formed, we will then also be able to get approval on the document. Let's wait a second for that to gather all of that information and create the contract. And then once it's finished, you can leave the page as well and come back. Usually it only takes a few seconds, especially if you filtered it down. But this is probably creating a document that's quite a few pages long. We can assign the document to different teams as well, if we wanted to. And as we add more team members to the project, we can also require them to sign that document as well. So in a second, this should finish, he says very confidently. Usually this really does only take a few seconds, so it must be quite a few pages long. And there we go. Okay, so now we've got this document. I could open the PDF and see what it looks like. And okay, yeah, 91 pages on this PDF. All of the details for the document have been filled out. So there's only myself on this project at the moment, but all of the cover pages and headers and footers and indexes and everything that we've defined in our project has now been created for us in here in a nice document that if we go all the way through to, let's look at, yeah, we've got links to these, to any external sites and any videos that were uploaded. And then we also have the scope. So in here, we have the different stages. So stage 4 with the 2 BIM uses and stage 6 with the handover as well. And everything in here as well is linked. So that stair example has a set of content that's also linked. If you go to the content, you can see this is the set of requirements, even down to what maybe specs were linked to that document as well, to that set of requirements as well. So you can see right the way through that chain of requirements back to that contract. I mentioned it's about getting approval. So how do we get approval? Well, there's only myself, so I'll just say I'll ask myself for approval, and that would be pretty easy. But I would get an email. The teams that would need required signatories, they would get emails. If I hit the review button, and I can say, I could sign my name by typing it, or I could manually sign my name like so, and agree to adopting that. And when I've signed it, it now gets affixed to that contract, and everything that has just been created, we see with the signature page and my signature, and every single person's signature will come through and be added to this exact same document. So this document has everything that we just saw in it, and it's now approved. So that one's a pretty quick one as far as getting approval. But what we looked at was using templates to create the plan and scope, filter it for a contract, and then get everyone's e-signature on that contract so that we can start off the project on the right foot with the right parties, knowing exactly what they need to do. The next step is to have a schedule, have a timeline of events and understanding not just what has to happen, but also when it might occur, when teams are likely to be working on certain parts of the workflow, so that if I'm the mechanical engineer, I know that I don't want to start placing some of this equipment until the structural steel has been finalized. Being able to understand and communicate and have those dependencies between tasks is really, really important. But one of the critical parts of the workflow is, and now I just to jump from these three modules to the project dashboard, this is where we would be adding all of our team members and teams and team members, and also defining project details, defining links out to other documents, other tools that we're using. Maybe we're using BIM 360 and we are using Zoom, and we have some links out to those tools. We can add a project image that will show up in everywhere else. We can define the teams. We can reorder teams so that these teams will show up in that order in other places. A whole bunch more that we can go into about adding prospective teams. Maybe if I was to make one of these teams to be a prospective team, actually probably going to, let's not do that right now. But the concept is, actually, I can just add a new team that's a prospective team. Let's say prospective team. That might be an appointed party. So if I add them, you see that they have different rights. There's a lot more detail to get into, but as you go through that bidding workflow, you might not want this team to be able to see other teams, and you might not want other teams to be able to see them until they are actually contracted on their work and starting to become part of the project. So there's some workflow in there. But I came to the dashboard so that I could turn on the other modules. So we'll have, in the second part of the demonstration, we're going to go through the schedule, track, and verify modules. If I turn those on, you'll see them appear at the top. And if I move from the workflow that we've just been talking about and move to the schedule, the first thing that we'll see is that per milestone, we don't have to start from scratch. We see all of the tasks that have been contracted for. And that example here, where we had the stairs, the concrete stairs, it is available for us for the structural team. Let's suppose that I am part of the structural team. And if I filtered just my work, I would start to see that by dragging and dropping, I can define the timeline and the durations for these tasks. So when I drag and drop these tasks in here, it's showing what I have been contracted for. And now I'm able to describe to the rest of the team when I'm going to be working on these activities. Really simple. It means that we don't have to think about what's in my scope. It's already defined as it's part of the contract. And every team has access to schedule their own stuff and to be able to really identify what it is and when it will be delivered, and understand that in surrounding with the other team's tasks as well. Really clear visual way of doing it. This can be complemented by adding your own tasks in the timeline as well as just untitled custom tasks, new task, and then everything that's in here is very flexible, very easy to be updated as well. We can define dependencies between these. So we could say from one task to another task, that needs to be a dependency. If there is a dependency that maybe is a critical dependency, we will see it in red. Usually when you have a dependency between teams, it's very important to have a discussion if there is a dependency that is red, because it is showing that maybe we're not going to be done in time for these guys to have all of the information to place the columns, for example. But the schedule moves on to the track. The tracking of these tasks, again, is usually a very difficult process in industry, because everyone's asking for input and updates. Where are you with this? Have you finished the stairs? Can I start my work yet? Can I have this piece of information? There's a lot of discussion, and there's a lot of starting and stopping and not really understanding how and when their teams should be focused on what work. So they're really focusing people on the right tasks to be working on, and keeping it all inside of that same workflow makes it more likely that teams are going to start and finish their task so that they're much more productive. It's a really simple Kanban based and lean philosophy in the track page. We have columns that represent the different status of the tasks, and each task is represented as a card. So if we look back over here, what you'll also see as we transition from the timeline from the schedule to the tracking is that the filter that we have applied, this filter in the top left-hand corner, is also carried through for the track page. So if I go into the track page, you'll see that it's just filtering for my tasks as the structural team. And I can then simply say, what out of these tasks are ready for review just by dragging and dropping them. And I can start to really easily and quickly drag and drop and say, I've done my stairs, I've done my wall foundations, and I've done my structural steel. These are ready for a team to review. It can be as simple as that, or you could add as many different columns in to represent maybe things like procurement and a whole bunch of other things, and creating a column with a specific color so that this color is shown when we start to go into the 3D model and verification. Maybe we would want to go through as that person and say, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and checking off these items, making sure that we have finished this set of activities, and being able to tell the manager, or this is consequently going to inform the manager through the notification engine and through email updates that things have now been progressed and they are ready to be approved. So the next step in the workflow is the verify. And the verify is both independent and also connected to a tool like BIM 360, where you might be housing your models. So if you have a Revit file or an IFC file or a bunch of others, I think there are 80 different file formats that we can ingest. You simply either drag and drop them into the browser in the verify module and start to connect them up and verify that the work has been done. Or we can connect to BIM 360, and the models that are on BIM 360 or uploaded to BIM 360 are synchronized so that they can be connected and you don't have to upload them into multiple places. So let's move from the track now that we've got 3 tasks that are ready to be connected to the model deliverables. And in the verify step, we are going to, as I mentioned, you could drag and drop a model into here if it was any of those file formats, or we can connect directly into BIM 360, and making sure that the add-on has been created, has been added to BIM 360. That's a very important part of the workflow. So inside of your Autodesk account, in the admin side, you need to add the Planoly app on that side so that it will allow you to connect and show your different projects so that you can have access to them. And actually, maybe I think, let's go back. So then when you click into a project, we can then see the folder structure, the files, and whether they're models. And in this example, I'm the structural engineer, so I'm going to say this structural file. And the key is tying it to the individual deliverables rather than the aggregated model, because you're checking these things before you go and do something. In this example, we are checking for 3D coordination, and we're making sure that the model that has been created meets these requirements before we go and run a clash detection or coordination session. So here we can start to see there's 2 versions that have come through. We have the tree structure to understand what's in the model very quickly, very easily. And we also have all of the views. So it's, for example, the 2D view as well, and the 2D view being able to be interrogated as well. Same principle. But let's look at it in the 3D view. And when we are ready for somebody to take a look at this, we're going to share the model, and we are going to say, let me just filter the statuses for ready for review. So these were the tasks that I'm saying are ready for review. And the stairs are linked to this task here. The foundations are linked to this task here. So we've got 2 examples of tasks that are ready for review. And if we look now just at turning on the status of these tasks, you can see that the blue, let's show everything again. The blue represents elements that have been statused, that have been linked to tasks that are statused as ready for review. If I was to be now the manager, take my hat off from the person reviewing and put the hat on as the manager, I would come into the environment, check the verify module and say, I'm going to take a look at the stairs. Maybe I'd use tools like the clustering tool to take them out of the building and understand them and identify them. You know, maybe there's certain requirements for the landings to be a certain size. Maybe there's certain parameters or properties that are required based on the requirements that we have defined. There's a whole bunch of other things that we can get into. We can also export the data from the scope and use it in tools like Solibri or other tools for model validation and verification, and parts of the workflow that might be connected to Power BI and etc. Some really lots of fun things that you can do with this data. But once we are happy that this is good to go, then we can simply verify the task, and you'll start to see elements that are turning green or to the color that have been chosen. And as let's show all, and let's throw those stairs back in the building, you'll start to see more and more of the model obviously turning green, and we can identify what the status is for elements as they go through. The ideal is that everything starts to become reviewed and green, and we have a model that if it's all green, it's ready to be published. So the version 2, if this was the model where we had everything to a state that we wanted people to then have access to the model, we would publish the model, and now they would have access to download that model or access it directly inside of BIM 360. A lot more to cover, everything from measuring, cutting cross sections, navigating the model, etc. But I am sure you're pretty familiar with a lot of those features if you are using other 3D tools. So, a quick summary. We've covered a lot, but how do we create it to start with? Well, we create a new project. We saw creating a project in the dashboard, and once we create it, we're exposed to all of the templates. And clicking the different templates as tiles that we would like to see, as we create those, it pulls them, puts them in as tabs that are accessible inside of that plan module. As we are creating the content, we are then building it based on the project that we're working on specifically. So we're adding all of the details. We're going through and sharing content, sharing some of the sections, not the whole document, but we're sharing it only the pieces that are ready. And then once we've shared those pieces, other people can come in and comment and go through that workflow. But we can also create the scope, the detailed requirements for who is needing to do what at what point in time. Here, this is an asset information requirement set. What assets, what information, at what point in time, and for what purpose. Being able to define that really quickly in the scope. And maybe, did I move that one forward? There we go. And also, being able to define the detailed information requirements as well on each of those assets. Maybe we need warranty date. Maybe we need a lot more detail on that. Actually, that's something that we didn't cover in detail, but the information palette at the bottom to be able to assign all of the information requirements as well. And at a certain point in time, we are going to want to add other tools, other links to other systems that we're using so that everyone has access to everything they need all in the same place. And we will add teams that are bidding on the work. So as we are creating new teams, potentially we might want to make them a prospective team. And a prospective team has certain restrictions so they don't have access to everything that maybe other people would need. So this prospective team comes in, they would see less, they would be restricted, they wouldn't see the other teams. They would maybe have certain tabs of the documents assigned to them, and they would then be maybe answering certain questions. Here, they're adding their resume, their CVs, and sharing that so that teams can have access to the response. Then we can come in and comment and ask for clarification. Maybe the owner, maybe the appointing party is saying, I would like to have more clarification on something. And they go through the commenting process. Teams can manage the documents as tabs, and each tab having a status so that each team having a restriction so that only certain access is provided to certain teams. And then once we've gone through all of that, how do we make it official? Well, we gather the pieces of the contract of the database and filter just for certain teams to be able to create a contract agreement. And then that contract agreement that's created, we can assign it to certain parties and also request certain approvals. In this example, asking for Zach's approval, my approval, and Ted's approval on the document. And then that person who receives the document request for signature would then go in and write their signature, and it's affixed as an electronic signature, legally binding, very secure, much more secure than the other traditional workflows of electronic signature as well, because you actually are part of a project team and you are logged in to be able to understand that you are working on that and working with the other teams. How do we go through all that workflow, contract for it, and then check for compliance? Well, we also have the model deliverable as well that would then be connected to the tasks. And we looked at the scheduling and tracking part so that we can understand when something is going to occur and whether it has occurred or not. But then it's really important that we verify the model deliverable before we then go and use it in the downstream workflow as well. there are some resources that you might like to source. Video-based education on the website and also in the app is available. So if you go to the top right-hand corner of the app, there's a question mark button that will pull up all of the training videos. You can subscribe for updates as more and more videos and content is added in here. There are 1-minute videos that just describe parts of the workflow. And there's also a masterclass. So if you start to use this in practice and you would like to get more in depth on the workflow, there are 4 sessions inside of a masterclass to get started as well.